Now, we are going to get an expert's take on all the developments of the past 24 hours or so. Going to take an in-depth look at the Inter-Korean Summit, the Panmunjom Declaration, and the prospects going forward, especially in light of the upcoming summit between the United States and North Korea. I'm delighted to say that I am joined in the studio today by Robert Kelly, Professor of Political Science at Pusan National University. Good afternoon, Robert.
Thanks for having me, Mark. It's good to be here.
So, plenty to talk about, isn't there?
Sure.
No matter how you look at it, what we saw on Friday was pretty amazing. And if the results are implemented as the declaration states, it's going to be big changes for the Korean Peninsula. Now, you've had some time, we've all had some time to digest what happened on Friday. What's your assessment?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that the principle was great, right? Sort of it was long on principle, and we've heard a lot of good things, right? Denuclearization and peace, and actually making the DMZ a genuine demilitarized zone. All that was really good. I mean, the rhetoric coming from North Korea in the last 4 months has been a big change, and we should acknowledge that, right? I mean, they're not talking like they were 6 months ago when it was dotard and sea of fire. We haven't heard that kind of language in a while, so that's good in itself, right? I mean, at least the tone has shifted, so everybody's less on edge than we were back around Christmas time. I think that the next question, and I think you've heard this a lot from other analysts in the last 24 hours, I mean, the next question is taking these principles and actually moving towards real verification, making sure that these things actually follow through, because as you said yourself and your reporters have noted as well, we've been here before, and so it's important that this be different than the previous times we've had good principle and then not much follow through. That's really the issue with verification.
I was reading a few of your pre-summit tweets on Friday, and I'd like to quote one back to you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
You said the divisions between North Korea and South Korea and the US are still huge. The likelihood we'll be back to where we were a few years ago. Sanctions, missile defense, the China track, etc., is higher than anyone wants to admit. And you also said that expectations have to be lowered quite a lot. Essentially, don't get too carried away by what happened on Friday. Has anything changed within the past 24 hours that makes you change your mind?
That's a good question. Not too much. Again, the tone coming from the North seems pretty good. I mean, it's looking good. I'm trying not to get sort of too carried away, right? Because I mean, that's sort of what's happened in the past, right? We sort of they say good things and then we get overexcited and then things don't come through. I mean, my big concern is that if you look at, for example, the Sunshine Policy, right? We had 10 years of this sort of intensive engagement effort. And our side, if you will, the South Korean and American side, we didn't actually come away from the Sunshine Policy with too much, I would argue. I mean, that's a detailed conversation. But I mean, that's really sort of my concern, is that, we've been here before, and at this point, I think there's not a lot of patience anymore for North Korea's lack of follow-through. If this happens again, the Trump administration is going to go back to where we stood relatively quickly, right? I mean, as the president himself said yesterday, I'm not going to be played the way previous Americans have been, previous presidents have been played. So that's why I made that argument that we could be back to where we were a year ago fairly rapidly, because I think American patience this time is much lower than in the past. And that's my big concern. The North Koreans have got to follow through relatively quickly, actually, right? I mean, like yesterday I was on a show with Bruce Bennett, and he made the argument that the North Koreans should give up maybe a couple of nuclear weapons in the next 6 weeks as a symbol of goodwill. I mean, that's how fast this is going. If the North Koreans don't move on this stuff pretty rapidly, I'm concerned we're going to be back to the tweet storms from the president we had last year.
And I want to stick to the denuclearization aspect because presumably North Korea, if it is actually serious, would want a gradual denuclearization, all while receiving rewards in the process.
Definitely.
While, as you said, President Trump wants things done fast. Full, complete, and verifiable denuclearization. So I want to ask, hypothetically speaking, if you were put in charge of overseeing this process, what kind of steps would you suggest to the policymakers, to President Trump?
I think it's probably a bridge too far to ask the North Koreans to give up something like nukes or something, even small nukes in the next couple of weeks. I think that's probably a bridge too far. They won't go for that. I think inspectors is probably the most important thing. We want to actually get people in there, neutral inspectors, third-party people, ideally some cameras, maybe from the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, something like that. But we want to get inspectors into North Korea so we can actually see how many missiles they have, how much nuclear material do they actually have, like a stockpile inventory, where is it kept, is it safe? I mean, there's a lot of concern about like a Chernobyl-style thing, because the test site, there's some question about whether the test site's going to collapse. I mean, we have a lot of questions about how the stockpile is maintained and where it is and who's running it and things like that. I think that would be something that the North Koreans could do in the next few months to really reassure everybody. It's like, here's a lot of information about our program. You know, during the Cold War, the Americans and the Soviets used to do this. They actually exchanged a fair amount of information to increase trust on both sides, right? So that you didn't have an accidental launch or something like that. And the North Koreans could go a long distance, I think, to making everybody more comfortable with their nuclear program if they told us more, right? And traditionally they haven't for national security reasons, but if we are moving towards peace, information is key.
Just quickly then, do you think President Trump would be satisfied with IAEA inspectors going in?
Yeah, that's tough. I don't know. He would probably insist there to be some Americans in there, or someone from a close American ally, like Japan or something like that. You know, maybe a European country, the Brits or something. But the North Koreans would probably be pretty uncomfortable with American inspectors wandering around. I mean, that's really where it's going to get really, really thorny. I just don't know if the president's going to accept IAEA. I mean, this president particularly is not, you know, he's tough, he's nationalist, he's not a big fan of international organizations. So my sense is he'll probably demand American concessions rather than IAEA ones.
There were two other things that came out of the declaration that are interesting to me. One talks about unification, but there isn't anything really substantial in there about what it might look like.
Right.
And the other point that jumped out to me was the potential for three-way talks that include the US, or even four-way talks, including the US and China. That means, of course, no mention of Russia or Japan. So, in particular, Tokyo, I think, is going to feel especially frozen out by this declaration. What are your thoughts in regards to the kind of vague nature of the unification pledge, and also to the fact that Russia and, in particular, Japan are being frozen out here?
Yeah, on the unification one first, that's tricky because you could put the two Koreas into a federation or confederation, and the North Koreans have been floating ideas like this for, and so is South Korea, honestly, right? This idea of like some kind of umbrella country, and you know, it would have like the sort of vague neutral flag, you know, the white and the blue. But the problem is ultimately is that how thick would that covering institution be? I mean, if it's just the two of them sort of under some thin umbrella, then it kind of doesn't really make much sense. I mean, ultimately, are you actually going to have some kind of unified government, some kind of unified decision making? And that, of course, would require major changes because North Korea and South Korea are really ideologically very distinct. And that's really the trick, right, is to get the political distance to close. The narrower it is, then the more a covering federation makes sense. Otherwise, I think, especially South Korean conservatives would say that a federation is just South Korea subsidizing North Korea. And so you get a lot of resistance in the conservative press. As for Japan and Russia, my sense is, you know, the Russians I don't really think are playing much of a role out here anymore. I think the real issue is Japan. I don't think Japan is directly relevant to the issue ultimately between the two Koreas. But if the South Koreans expect, or the North Koreans expect, that Japan will play a major financial role if there's a final peace deal between North Korea and Japan, then you got to bring the Japanese in. I mean, you can't ask the Japanese to provide a huge amount of assistance and not let them in the room. I mean, that's really the trick ultimately, is if you want the Japanese to help funding, and that's a big issue, then you've got to at least find a way to talk to them. So I imagine that's coming.
Everyone in Korea was naturally talking about what was happening on Friday, and a lot of people I spoke to were impressed, I'd say, by Kim Jong-un. And it's probably what he wanted to happen. And I think it really is important that we should keep in mind that he is the leader of this reprehensible regime with an awful human rights record, political prison camps. There's even solid evidence that he had his half-brother killed by a nerve agent in Malaysia. With all that's happened over the past 24 hours, can we really trust Kim and North Korea now? They've gone back basically on every single agreement they've made anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's ultimately the problem that President Moon faces, right? I mean, if he brings home a deal that really involves serious South Korean concessions, you know, for example, for family reunions, would that mean that, you know, would South Korean hawks, would South Korean conservatives, and American conservatives too, right? Because, you know, America's a part of this role because of the defense relationship. You know, can Moon get this deal past hawks and conservatives both here and in Washington? I mean, that's going to be a real acid test. I mean, he was only elected with 41% of the vote. Now he's got a 71% approval rating, which says that he's got some political space to push a deal. But I mean, ultimately, hawks are going to say just what you said. It's like, look, this is still North Korea. North Korea is still the DPRK, and it's still got gulags and the rest. And so far, it's good talk, but North Korea is not changing. if it's not going to change, then we need verification. I mean, hawks are going to push the president on this pretty hard, I think, actually, and that's going to be the acid test here in South Korea, right? Can Jae-in get this politically by the conservatives, by the Liberty Party, the Liberty Korea Party, by the conservative media in South Korea? I think that's going to be a challenge. I mean, that's coming. I think the president's going to have to make a campaign for that, but that'll be a big hurdle. And then again, this is why North Korea giving us something serious, maybe like a few nukes or closing a gulag, something. If the North Koreans give us something, it will help both President Trump and President Moon sell this to skeptical audiences, both in South Korea and in the U.S.
Well, on the subject of critics, both of President Moon and President Trump, they're going to say by meeting with Kim,
right.
They're giving Kim exactly what he wants.
Yeah.
He's the legitimacy he hungered for all these years. And also with the talk of the denuclearization and the end of the Korean War, it leaves some of us asking, if the regime, like it says it has, claims to have completely finished development of its nuclear missile programs, it comes to the point where you'd say, why would they have come all this way just to say, okay, well, we fold now, take it all?
Right. Yeah, I'm actually very skeptical that the North Koreans will go to zero, right? Complete, verifiable, irreversible disarmament, CVID. I'm actually really skeptical the North Koreans do it, just like you said. I mean, they spent 40 years developing these things. You hear these rumors that it costs like 3 or 4% of North Korean GDP. We know that North Korea is a poor place. I mean, this was a huge effort. So why would they do all this and then surrender them? So again, expectations management, like I said on Twitter yesterday, we just have to sort of make sure that we don't get too carried away, that our hopes aren't getting ahead of what the North Koreans are likely to surrender. But my own sense is, if the North Koreans are really willing to deal, then we should seriously think about some kind of concession, sanctions relief or something. I mean, we have a lot of cards on our side, if you will. South Korea is a much wealthier place than North Korea. North Korea desperately wants to be connected to the global economy. We know the sanctions are starting to hurt, and we have a lot of leverage, but there's got to be some kind of deal. The North Koreans have got to give us something real. A test halt is not enough. They've got to actually have to make a positive concession that's somewhat painful to them, giving us a missile count, something they don't want to do, as a sign of good faith, and then we can make a response. And that's ultimately what's going to have to happen in the next 6 months. Or, as Donald Trump said, he might walk out of the meeting. I mean, I really am genuinely concerned that if the North Koreans don't put something real on the table, the president might just walk out of the room.
Yeah.
And then we're back to what we were talking about. Then it's, we're back to missile defense and THAAD and that whole fight.
Yeah, well, he said that if he does walk out of the meeting, he will do so in a respectful manner.
I hope
so. So naturally, as a segue to that then, the attention now turns to this summit between Trump and Kim, which the world is extremely anxious to see. How do you see it playing out, if it does happen? And how much credit do you think President Trump should be given for getting us to this point? Because under the Obama administration, we had the strategic patience for 8 years. We never had talks like this happen. So how much kudos should we give to President Trump?
Yeah, I'm a little concerned about the Trump-Kim summit, to be honest, only because the president himself is such a wild card. I'm genuinely concerned about what the president might actually say. I mean, if you actually watch the president on YouTube or whatever, or listen to him on the phone. I mean, yesterday he was on Fox kind of screaming into the phone, and the hosts were trying to get him off the phone because he sounded a little unhinged. I am genuinely concerned what his mood might be. If the Mueller investigation is getting worse, Stormy Daniels, all these things. I mean, this is impacting the president's mood. I am a little bit concerned just about sort of straight up psychology issues. What is he going to be like when they meet? So as long as it doesn't really veer off and become, like what happened last year on Twitter where they're insulting one another, I think the real issues will be, like I said, are the North Koreans going to give us anything serious? And because I think Trump's patience is substantially less than what Obama said. Strategic patience, and the president explicitly said that's out. We're just not going to do that. So, and John Bolton has said this too, that the negotiations should be very short. I mean, I don't think this is going to take like 2 or 3 days. I think this is probably going to be like a few hours, and then the president might simply walk out.
Well, lots to chew over the next coming weeks and months. Professor Kelly, it's been a pleasure. We know you're a very busy man.
Thank you for having me.
And we appreciate you coming in here on your Saturday to share with us your insights. Thank you.
Thank you.